One by one the canoes beached on the Vinland shore, and they leaped over the sides of the rocky shoreline. Gudrid's eyes immediately lifted to the raging battle. She heard the war cries of her people and the crack of metal splitting wooden spears. Metal and wood clattered in harmony as the Norse fought as one unified fighting force. The inferior firepower of the natives was not a factor in this fight. It was raw manpower that mattered, and that was something that her people did not have on their side. In the minutes that she stood on that shore slowly gazing from left to right, she knew that battle tactics were not going to save her people. Retreat or truce were the only options left for survival. She looked at Taliriktug in desperation. "Can you do anything?" Gudrid guessed that Ari's rise as a self-proclaimed leader had split the tribes of this land into opposing factions. Tribes that were once friends and allies were now blood enemies. Families fought against families in bloody retribution for crimes committed against one another and their kin. Gudrid glanced at Taliriktug. She was slowly beginning to understand the effect that her people had on the native society, an effect that would last for hundreds of years to come. One non-native in this land was a curiosity, something for the community to look at and wonder. 10 were enough to upset the balance of power and their communal and pastoral existence. 100 or even 200 threatened the existence of the entire native civilization. Even though it was much more temperate than Groenlandia, life in this land was harsh enough. The growing season was too short to rely on crops, so the natives moved where the food went, following the herds and living on its rocky shores for fish. Even sometimes going without the traditional food if the year was not a good one. But they still survived. Then strangers started coming, beginning with the robed Chaldees who initially refused their daughters as gifts and had nothing to trade, because their god did not allow them to possess anything. But they lived in peace with the natives, took what they needed from the land without over-harvesting its resources, so they were welcome as kindred. But then her people, the Norse, came, and took everything without giving back. They remained strangers, which was confusing and in opposition to the way the natives lived. They went too far, until the patience and kindness of the natives was stretched so far that war seemed the only recourse, something that they'd managed to avoid for time out of mind. Taliriktug scanned the battlefield, searching for the chiefs or even their firsts, commanding the tribes, of which Taliriktug counted several. Minor differences in their war paint, their clothing, even the color of the feathers they wore in their hair identified the warriors' tribes. "I do not see the chiefs," he said after a moment. He climbed onto a rock and looked beyond the sweat-covered Norse splattered in the blood of his people. Standing on a rocky outcrop at the far edge of the battlefield were 3 men in elaborate headdresses. Their stance and posture exuded tribal nobility. "I think I see them, Gudrid," he said, pointing, "standing on those rocks. We must go to them. We must tell them that they have to stop." "Gudrid," Freydis interrupted, "you are staying with me in safety. I will not allow you to endanger your life again." "I will not be told to choose between my husband and my child," Gudrid snapped. "There is nothing you can do, Gudrid. You will be killed," Freydis insisted. Gudrid turned to the man of heroic stature behind her. "Snorri, can you see Thorfinn?" Snorri lifted his chin and scanned the battlefield. "No, Gudrid, I can't. I'm sorry." Gudrid seethed silently. She didn't know what that meant. Was Thorfinn at some safe location? Was he lying in the tall grass of the meadow, bleeding? She couldn't deal with questions that she couldn't answer right now. She held her stomach and prayed to the first god that entered her consciousness. As usual, it was Odin, the wanderer with whom she had felt a kinship since her childhood. "Please," she silently said, "you've taken 2 husbands away from me. I cannot bear to have my son brought up a stranger to his father. Could you not exclude him from fighting the final battle?" The battle became a veil that was pulled aside, and she saw a field occupied by fighting natives and Norsemen, but also a clear pathway between the point where she stood and where the chiefs stood. She need only take the first step onto that path across the battlefield. Gudrid dropped her pack to the ground and stepped onto the path. "Gudrid, what are you doing?" Freydis screamed. "It's too dangerous." She grabbed her arm. Gudrid managed to wriggle free of Freydis's carrying clutch. However much Freydis feared, she had to trust Gudrid's ability to see things that others could not. Freydis didn't attempt to grab her again. As Gudrid walked into the battle, her presence did not go unnoticed by the Norse. She knew of their unspoken duty to protect the non-warriors on the voyage at all costs, especially her, Thorfinn's wife. Some warriors glared at her, questioning her sanity in this matter, but they couldn't deny the bravery that she exhibited. She walked into the fighting at a steady pace. Her sword remained in its sheath at her side. "Gudrid, go back," Brunfolder pleaded while hitting an attacking native with his shield. "It is too dangerous. You will be killed." Gudrid's focused movement across the battlefield was distracting, to say the least. All the Norse warriors knew who she was and the importance of protecting her. Seeing their opponent's reaction to this single female moving across the battlefield, the natives sensed her importance and concentrated their efforts on getting to her. Gudrid heard her heart pounding in her eardrums, and the beating of her unborn baby's heart echoing it. The salty Vinland wind blew across her face, but anything else around her was lost in the ether. It was strange seeing mouths opened and screams that were not heard, wooden shields hitting bodies in silence. Is this what it is like to die? She wondered. The fighting around her changed into a waking dream. The warriors became translucent, and watching the battle was like watching a reflection in a pool of water. She saw the action in front of her as well as what was happening beyond, below the surface. On the other side of the battlefield, Thorfinn and his senior warriors protected the structures of Leif's settlement from natives trying to set grass roofs on fire with a continuous stream of flaming arrows. Thorfinn and his men held them as far back as possible, trying to push them farther back beyond the range of the arrows. They were fortunate. The third line protecting the Norse settlement quickly extinguished the arrows that did hit their targets. The other arrows were either blown off course by the ocean wind or guttered out in midair. "I am not a warrior," Thorfinn kept repeating to himself. "I am a man of commerce. I do not want to do this." His anger went into the swing of his broadsword, which struck a native on the back, nearly cleaving him in two. "They will set the entire meadow on fire," Gudrid thought. "Don't they see what they are doing?" They risked not only the land that they relied on for growing food and foraging wild berries, but the animals they hunted that the land sustained, not to mention their own lives. Gudrid didn't fully discount the idea. It was a plan that she tried desperately to get out of her head. To set the entire meadow ablaze was a destructive and evil thing to do, a tactic that unfortunately was popular among her people. They called it blazing. When Norse armies gave up fighting, knowing that they could not win the battle, they would set the land ablaze, preventing the enemy from either gaining a stronghold or pursuing the fleeing Norse army. The act was stupid, overture, for two reasons she could think of. It didn't guarantee victory. The battle could be easily fought somewhere else, and it was uncontrollable. A warlord could wipe out his own army as well as the enemy, not to mention the land that he was attempting to conquer. Warrior trust could easily falter and be permanently lost with such a desperate battle decision. Thorfinn was defending everything that he had worked so hard for over the last year. The homes of his friends that they'd rebuilt in the excavated land where the permanent fort would one day stand. Blazing would be the furthest thing from Thorfinn's mind. Thorfinn quickly examined his troops. They were brave to defend what they had worked so hard for in the last year. He was very proud of them, but as he looked into the heart of the fighting, something was not right. He couldn't quite understand why, but there was a calm where there should have been tension. The imbalance was not threatening, but bothersome, especially when his people were intently engaged in battle. Then he saw the source of his unease. Someone was walking through the center of the battle, surrounded by fighting Norse and natives. She moved like an apparition across the meadow as easily as an eagle would fly through the air. At first, he thought it was a being from Valhalla. Then the figure walked out from behind the layers of battling men, and he saw Gudrid calmly walking toward him, smiling. Thorfinn's initial shock switched to reflexive action. He jumped, bashing a native in the head and shoulders with his shield to knock him out of the way, leapt over another whose body had dropped moments earlier, and hit another with the flat side of his broadsword. "Gudrid!" Thorfinn yelled as he stomped over the bodies of two more natives. His sword flailed in front of him, propelling him closer to Gudrid. Anger intermittently interrupted his desperation, mingled with worry and fear. His mind raced from one emotion to another. What was she thinking, putting herself in jeopardy like that? Where were those who had promised to protect her, Tostig, Snorri, Ingebjord, Asgir, and Freydis, who were supposed to be her friends? But in his milliseconds of reason, Thorfinn noticed that as Gudrid walked toward them, the fighters immediately in front of and alongside her opened a narrow pathway through the sea of thrusting and swinging swords. As they hacked off limbs, as blood shot and sprayed in all directions, as spun flails struck the soft, tanned faces of the natives, Gudrid walked by unscathed. Thorfinn plowed through the front line of the flank he and his men fought to maintain. He wasn't a warrior, so he didn't think in warrior terms. His instincts told him that in a way the threat was not the natives, but him and his people. Like every other community, including the Norse community, the one had rules and protocols that needed to be followed. They had ignored them, and they were now paying the consequences. Thorfinn now saw the arrogance of believing that he could create a community, a country, and even an economic empire on the tip of this peninsula. He saw the effect of that human failing right before his eyes. He looked above Gudrid and gasped. A native warrior had climbed over two men fighting behind her. In close combat, a sharp-edged rock tensely clutched in his fist. He was bearing down on his intended target, Gudrid. Thorfinn knew that he couldn't reach her in time, and his fighters, so severely outnumbered, were already struggling to keep the fighting away from Gudrid. With a quick hand signal, Thorfinn instructed Gudrid to move out of the way. Then he hurled his broadsword, desperately hoping that his aim was as good as he thought. The sword twirled through the air and struck his target in the side of the head, hard enough to knock the native off balance. He toppled to the ground and lay there motionless, stunned and bleeding from a gash on the side of his head. Gudrid was picking herself up off the ground, careful not to get in the way of any of the fighters. Thorfinn ran forward and grabbed her around the waist and picked her up. Cradling her in his arms, he carried her away from the center of the fighting. "Gudrid, my love, it's wonderful to see you," Thorfinn puffed. He frowned. "Have you gained some weight? You seem a little heavier." "Yes, I have, and it's your doing, Thorfinn," she said, smiling. "Do you mean?" "Yes, our child." Thorfinn felt another surge of adrenaline pulse through his body. His heart pounded, but this time with joy rather than anger, courage rather than fear. But as with all impulsive emotions, it began to subside, and the reality of caring for and being responsible for a helpless human life damped the initial euphoria. Thorfinn set Gudrid down behind a clump of bushes and a copse of trees that offered some protection from spears and arrows and any native attacks that broke through Thorfinn and his men. Then he returned to the fighting. Gudrid watched Thorfinn leave. Her thoughts shifted from worrying about him to hoping that Taliriktug had safely made his way to the chiefs and convinced them to end the battle for the sake of everyone. She thought that maybe she could use her powers to influence the chiefs. If they listened to what she had to say, then perhaps they could come to an accommodation. The Norse would leave Vinland in exchange for sparing their lives. There were too many native warriors for the Norse to overcome in battle. If both sides could not live in peaceful coexistence, then eventually the fighting would wear his people down to the point that their existence was threatened. Life on Vinland was over for Thorfinn and her. She would not return to this land again. She could see far enough into the future to sense that much. She looked out through the clump of bushes toward the rock where the chief stood. From her vantage point she couldn't see their faces, but their headdresses could not be missed. They towered at least another photo above the chiefs' heads. She knew that she'd be all right, walking behind Thorfinn and the others. The natives could not harm her. Her dreams and waking dreams had shown her surrounded by fighting, and she'd known that even though she was a part of the fighting, she remained separate and safe from its effects. This had to be that battle. Whether the outcome was good or bad for her, or the Norse, she knew that things were unfolding the way they should. "Gudrid!" a female voice yelled behind her. Gudrid wasn't sure if she heard her friend's voice over the battling happening nearby, or if she merely sensed her presence. She looked behind her and saw Freydis running toward her, holding her shield up over her head to protect her from the arrows that were being fired at her. She even dispatched a native or two running across her path with a quick swing of her axe. Gudrid, I am here to stand by your side, she announced when she stopped, panting before Gudrid. Gudrid didn't know what to say. Freydis's gesture was an honorable one, but she didn't think that she needed the protection. Gudrid's visions of this day revealed that this was her path. She wasn't sure why, but she was confident that it would be revealed to her sometime soon. Freydis, you are my greatest friend, my sister and my protector. But this is something that I must do alone. Freydis started protesting, but Gudrid raised her hand to quiet her. I know you are concerned, fear for my life and my baby's life. We have seen too much death, you and I, but please believe me. Just as I safely walked across the battlefield, I will safely return. She gave Freydis a brief hug. Then she stepped out into the meadow. She didn't look back. The battle had not reached this far. The stalks of wild wheat were upright and bowing from side to side in the wind. Showing no fear with her head raised high, Gudrid walked toward the rock where the chiefs of the 3 tribes stood, overseeing their warriors. Neither their sight nor their posture wavered. The numbers they commanded gave them confidence. As Gudrid approached these men of power, she knew that they would not find a single female threatening. At the opportune time, she would disarm herself and approach them with open arms. As Gudrid drew closer, she could see some of the features of these warrior leaders. They were slender and tall even without their headdresses. Their chins jutted proudly. Tattoos lined their foreheads, and the hair on their front half of their heads had been shaved, enhancing their wide skulls. She wondered if these cosmetic enhancements enforced the illusion of larger heads and therefore smarter leaders. They did seem majestic and powerful as they observed the force that threatened their life in Vinland. 3 warrior guards near the chiefs noticed Gudrid and raised their spears. She stopped and raised her hands in front of her chest, then slowly moved her hands down her abdomen to her sheathed sword. Slowly she pulled it out and dropped it on the ground. With her hands raised in front of her, she walked closer to the triad of leaders. One of the leaders shouted what sounded like an order to the guards. They backed away immediately and lowered their spears. Gudrid took it as a sign that she was allowed to approach. She stared up into their faces, as she did, never taking her eyes off them. The chief stared at her in astonishment. Then one of them slowly opened his arms, and his expression changed from aggression to acceptance. He began talking in the language of his people. I can't understand. I don't. She gave up in frustration. I can help, Taliriktug said from behind her. Taliriktug, I'm so glad to see you. If the warrior guards did not trust Gudrid, she knew that they trust her now, with the arrival of Taliriktug. She stepped to one side so Taliriktug could stand beside her, then watched as he spoke to the chiefs. Taliriktug turned to the chiefs and bowed. How do you know this woman? The Beotha chief Wapanip demanded. This woman saved us from the villain Ari, Taliriktug replied. This woman is our tribe's woman, Yakama, Wapanip retorted. We saw her die in childbirth 2 seasons ago, right before our eyes. Our medicines could not heal her. With all due respect, Chief Wapanip, this is Gudrid, wife of the Norse leader who arrived here on a large ship. Gudrid touched his arm. Taliriktug turned to her and relayed their conversation so far. Tell him that I did see a woman at our settlement, said Gudrid. In the longhouse. I had a vision. A woman in a kirtle, with a band around her head appeared. Her hair was brown, her face pale, and her eyes like those of the chief's people. I asked her to sit down and we tried to communicate, but there was a loud crash and she disappeared. I looked out the door, but I didn't see her. A commotion distracted me. One of Thorfinn's men had killed a native who tried to steal weapons. Taliriktug took several seconds to translate Gudrid's story. As he did, the chief's expression changed from intrigue to surprise, and then to understanding. I see this as an omen. This brave woman has risked her life and the life of her child to save her people. We must call off the war, Wapanip said to the Micmac and Wendat chiefs. Both leaders nodded in agreement. Taliriktug turned to Gudrid. They will call off the fighting. Wapanip nodded to one of the guards who picked up a horn and set it to his lips. His cheeks puffed out as he blew into its wooden mouthpiece. Over the sounds of the battle, the clash of weapons and the cries of the injured and the wails of the dying The horn bellowed, to the top of the sky and back again. Gudrid covered her ears, and again another loud boom reverberated over the battlefield. As quickly as the Micmacs, Wendat, and Beothuk had begun their attack, they retreated. Some of the Norse tried to continue their attack against the retreating natives, but they were either too injured or too battle-weary to be effective. The native warriors melted into the woods, leaving their dead and wounded on the battlefield. The Norse, who were still mobile, dropped to their knees, shoulders sagging in exhausted relief. The three chiefs turned and climbed down the rock without looking at or acknowledging Gudrid or Taliriktug. Then Wabanip stopped and turned back to them. "You may stay till your child is born," he said. "Then you must leave our land forever. Tell your people that they must never return." He turned and walked after the other chiefs. Gudrid nodded numbly when Taliriktug relayed this ultimatum to her. Then she turned and looked back at Thorfinn. He was approaching her, not really angry, but she noticed that he didn't look too pleased with her for leaving the protection of the bushes. He reached out and pulled her into a hug. "I thought I asked you to stay behind me, Gudrid. I believe one day you will cause me to drop dead from fright," he said. Freydis joined them, followed by Tostig and Snorri. Gudrid acknowledged them with a nod, then turned back to Thorfinn. "We cannot stay here, Thorfinn. The chiefs will allow us to remain here only until Snorri is born." "Snorri?" Thorfinn said, lifting an eyebrow. "Yes." Gudrid's hand fell to her stomach. "It will be a boy, and his name will be Snorri, after the man who saved my life." All eyes turned to Snorri Thorbrandsson, who looked back with a sheepish look on his face. Thorfinn approached him in such haste that Snorri stumbled back a few steps, confusing his advance as aggression. "You are from this day forth my kin," Thorfinn announced. "Wherever you are, know that you will always have a home at Brattahlid." "And a sister," Gudrid added. "And a sister," Freydis echoed. "My son," Thorfinn was grinning, his tone musing. "I'm going to have a son." Then he turned to his navigator and said briskly, "Tostig, how soon can you build a ship that will take us home?" "With the crew and all hands helping, I could have a ship built in 5 months." Thorfinn nodded. "As soon as we get back to the settlement, begin organizing the people and the resources." Gudrid touched Thorfinn on the shoulder. When he looked at her, she tried to read his expression. Under his mask of confidence, she saw disappointment and dejection. She understood why. This voyage had been an expensive venture for him. To return only with the meager resources that he'd managed to harvest from Vinland was a loss that he would have to bear over time. The embarrassment of returning to his own people unsuccessful, at least in his eyes, was a blow to his ego, and her announcement of a baby must have added to his worries. She knew it would take a while for Thorfinn to get through it, but she was confident that he'd recover. He was energetic and strong. They would both get through it together. "I didn't get a chance to ask you," Thorfinn said as they led their people back to the settlement. "Was your Markland mission a success?" She thought about it, mulling over it in her mind, whether she would reveal the details of that trip to him or wait for another time. Her near-death experience and their discovery of the treasure cave. Thorfinn knew and respected her previous life. His question went as far as his concern for Gudrid's safety. She smiled. "That will be a tale best told later," she said. She didn't mind his methods. This was how couples communicated in areas that were sensitive. It was like taking a pot of boiling water off the hearth. Carelessness could spill the cauldron, causing pain. And when accidents did happen, burns healed, some sooner than others. When they arrived at the settlement, men were still dousing the smoking roofs with buckets of seawater. They were happy to see the fighters returning, and especially Gudrid and the rest of the Markland group. "This is a triumphant day," Andor yelled from his perch. "We are victorious in battle." Gudrid didn't have the heart to tell him how the battle had been resolved. They'd hear of the events that took place in the last few hours soon enough. "Gunnar, Anakin, when you put those fires out, come down here," Tostig yelled. Tostig looked happy to be back in their temporary home. Gudrid met his eye. "Will you miss this?" she asked. "This?" Tostig swept his arm out, encompassing the settlement in the gesture. I was happy navigating the Mimer. Gudrid knew better. Tostig, like everyone else, had nothing. For all the work that they had done, there would be no sharing in the riches and the resources of the voyage. He hadn't come on the trip merely for the glory of traveling on the back of the great serpent, or to share in adventure. He'd come for one thing, and one thing only, for the money. You are different now, Tostig, Gudrid said. Like all of them, he'd be going home a different person. He'd earned Thorfinn's trust, and his mates respected his authority. There would be no whispers and snickers from the crew when the diminutive Tostig stepped up to the Nar's bearing dial on the trip home. Tostig shrugged. Such is life. You never step in the same river twice. Gudrid looked at Thorfinn. We're going home. Thorfinn nodded, eyes on the shoreline. Gudrid followed his gaze, watched the surf advance and recede at what seemed like a snail's crawl, much like the hopes and expectations of Thorfinn and the crew. Standing next to him, with her hand on her stomach, Gudrid prayed to the gods that they would leave Vinland unharmed. Gudrid put her arm around Thorfinn's waist. I wanted to make sure you are all right. I'll be all right. I was just thinking about all we had lost. Lost? Gudrid questioned. We've traversed an ocean, we've seen a new land, and we've encountered new peoples. What have we lost? We have gained, my love. Thorfinn hugged her to his broad chest. The wind caught the tall grass and set it dancing. Perhaps you are right. If we came to Vinland for more than conquest and wealth, then we have been successful. Now that this new land is known, perhaps more people will seek it out, and this endeavor will not be lost.